Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, live again at ECI Impact 2023. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Dr. Pat Harned, president of ECI. Pat, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure.
So, Pat, what we're doing on these podcasts is asking our guests to maybe look forward. And you gave a great keynote this morning, looking back certainly on the history appropriately of ECI and its predecessors, but more importantly, where we are at this dynamic point in ethics and compliance and what ECI's role will be going forward. So I was wondering if you might highlight some of the great initiatives that you talked about this morning.
Sure, I'm happy to. So part of what we're doing here at this event, of course, is celebrating the milestone that we've reached 100 years as a nonprofit. Our association has hit 30 years, but there's nothing like a milestone like that to make you also stop and pause and say, where are we going as a profession? So what I have been talking about and what we are planning on doing is really trying to look forward and anticipate what we think is very quickly becoming the convergence of a lot of different fields that until now have been separate from each other. So what I talked about this morning was the fact that employees are increasingly at the future workforce is coming into workplaces with an expectation that they're going to work for purpose-driven companies. They want to be a part of organizations that are going to have a positive impact in the world, and they're not going to put up with it if their companies don't. We're seeing consumer behavior following the same lines. Consumers are willing to pay more for products from companies that are taking responsibility for their impact in the world. And I think for us as a profession, all these years that I've been with ECI watching our profession, we've talked a lot about wanting to have a seat at the table, to have leadership take the values that they espouse and actually apply them into the business. And that is starting to happen. My concern is that if the ethics and compliance profession doesn't have a thought leadership role, as ESG becomes more prominent, as the risk conversation gets attached to that more, we're going to be subsumed by it. So ECI, what we've declared is that we are going to be thought leaders in that space. We're putting together a blue ribbon commission that's looking at what does an effective ESG effort look like and how does that tie to corporate purpose and corporate values. What's the role of the ethics and compliance function in helping to help companies achieve the mandates that are coming down the pike, all those expectations. So it's an exciting time for us.
So that really mirrors other developments, both from the business side of things, from the regulatory side of things, and even from the legal side of things, this convergence you talked about. And I'm going to point to the Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of a corporation with 5 different stakeholder groups rather than simply a shareholder or the investor groups. From the regulators' perspective, we have the Department of Justice announcing a CCO certification requirement designed to elevate the role of the CCO during the pendency of a deferred prosecution agreement. And even out of the Delaware courts, we have a decision in the McDonald's case which elevated the requirement of corporate executives to a duty of oversight, but specifically saying that the 2 top executives in a corporation were the CEO and the CCO. We've got this, as you said, convergence. And then, of course, the business issues around ESG, human capital, a new generation coming into the workforce.
Absolutely.
The great resignation, the pandemic, all of these things have come together to really put ECI on the cusp of not a new mission, but a renewed mission, if that would be a fair assessment.
I think that's a very fair assessment. One of the things that I've been very proud of about ECI is that we've always tried to have an eye towards what's coming down the pike. There are a lot of great organizations in our field that have done an amazing job of helping equip ethics and compliance professionals with the tools they need to essentially deal with a lot of regulatory things. And certainly we've been a part of that too, but the world we're entering into is so vastly different. And that's where I think ECI has something to offer, because we do have the connections to the enforcement community. We do have certainly a lot of grounding in the ethics and compliance space with professionals that are a part of our community. But also, to your point, Tom, the more the role of the compliance officer is becoming tied to very senior levels of the organization with liability attached to it, presumably. We've been saying all these years we want to have a seat at the table, we want to have a leadership role. That's happening, comes with liability, but now we need to use it. Because if we don't, it's the next generation of employees is looking at companies and saying, when are they going to actually be taking action on some of these big problems that we're increasingly facing?
I want to pick up on one point that, frankly, I was not as aware of until your keynote, which was the dialogue between the ECI and the Department of Justice and other regulators. You pointed to the original 2012 version of the FCPA resource guide, but I also understand that really the DOJ will look to the ECI for guidance and input around topics not simply important to compliance officers, but really to businesses. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think it is fair, and in fairness, they also reach out to a lot of stakeholder groups. So when they are contemplating new policies, it's been a very nice development to see. It has not always been the case. It has waxed and waned with different leadership, different administrations. But one thing that has been, I think, very productive is that when they're contemplating a new policy, they'll conduct listening sessions. They'll bring in different groups, nonprofit groups, consumer groups, and they've been gracious to reach out to us and invite us to offer input from time to time. And that usually looks them contacting us and asking for ethics and compliance practitioners who have experience in certain areas that are of interest to them, and we'll just go and participate in a meeting where they'll ask lots of questions, ask about the complexity of what goes on in businesses, sometimes talk a little bit out loud about some of the things they're thinking, but we never know when we leave those sessions what direction that's going to head. But it has happened a number of times, and it's something that we really value, at least about the DOJ, that they're interested in the input from our profession.
I'd like to end with asking you about some of the passion I see from ethics and compliance professionals to be a part of this dialogue. And I'd point to Paige Motes, I'd point to Anthony O'Reilly, volunteers who have either come to you in the form of ECI or you've reached out to that are helping lead these dialogues and efforts. Could you say a few words about that?
Sure. We have been so fortunate that some of the greats of our field, the folks who have been in the trenches for years and years in their corporations, who've really seen a lot of things throughout their careers, when they retire, when they decide it's time to do something different with their own careers, they'll contact us, or sometimes I'll reach out to them if I hear they're in between jobs or otherwise looking to do something different. But they often come to us and say, I still want to be relevant. I have a lot of perspective to give, want to give back to the profession. And so we've created a way to have them serve as senior advisors to us. And so they are available to our members to answer questions or to help work through some challenges that any of our members face. Some of them are leading peer leadership groups where we take leaders from our profession, bring them together, and a senior advisor will advise them and mentor them. Others are helping with some of our fee-for-service engagements, and folks like Paige, she's helping with this new Blue Ribbon Commission effort that we have underway. So it's exciting and just a great way for us to be able to keep the folks that have been so wise and so experienced involved in our profession.
Unfortunately, I don't think you and I will be around, but I can't wait to see the second 100th anniversary of ECI and what ECI does in the third millennium. Pat, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
My pleasure, Tom. Thanks.